It's Monday, October 15th, and I'm your host, Paula Hersey. On today's show, the Mid-Cape Cultural Council is providing grant funding for projects in Barnstable and Yarmouth and is seeking project applications. And we do a deep dive on the floodplains and the flood insurance community rating system. Let's start with some news you can use. Do you need to register to vote? Need an absentee ballot or want to vote early? The town clerk's office has some important date reminders for this month. Dates coming right up, October 17th, last day to register to vote for the November 6th town election. October 22nd, early voting begins in the town clerk's office, 367 Main Street, 8:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. November 2nd at 4:30 p.m. is the close of early voting. November 5th, noon, absentee balloting closes. Also, the clerk's office will close at noon to prepare for the state election November 6th. State election polls will be open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. To confirm your registration if unsure, call the clerk's office at 508-862-4044. The Mid-Cape Cultural Council is taking applications from organizations, schools, and individuals to award grant money to support activities in the cultural, humanities, science disciplines in the town of Barnstable and the town of Yarmouth. We learn more with MC representatives Marilyn Hebring and Rachel Youngling. Do you have a love of the arts? Do you have a project that you want to bring to the community and need funding for it? Well, the town of Barnstable has the Mid-Cape Cultural Council, who is now accepting grants and grant proposals. So with me today is Chair Marilyn Hebring and Treasurer Rachel Youngling. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you.
Yep.
So this is the time of year that the Mid-Cape Cultural Center loves, is that you start to get proposals in from the community in order to fund art projects, but also science and humanities as well. So Marilyn, tell us a little bit about the Mid-Cape Cultural Center. What does it do?
Well, primarily that is what we do, is we give grants in those areas. But we have branched out and we are doing public art and other things. We work both with the town of Barnstable and the town of Yarmouth. Okay. So we accept grants from anyone on the Cape, but we do look at primarily grants that serve people in those communities. But then often there are grants that serve people all over the Cape, which would benefit people in those two townships.
Okay. And Rachel, where does the money come from that funds these grants?
Very good question. We are funded through the Massachusetts Cultural Council, which gets all of its funding from the legislature. So it goes into the state budget. This year they were awarded $14 million in funding, and of that we've been allocated $12,800 to grant to the community. We still have to go through a process to decide what we still have remaining from prior years, so that amount could actually rise.
Wow, that's great. That's some good money for organizations and individuals to bring to usually our underserved communities. So talk a little bit about some of the criteria that you look for in a grant.
Well, we would like it to serve the populations of those two townships, but we like to see that it's serving youth, it's serving people that sometimes aren't accessible to the arts or the humanities or the sciences. One of the projects that we funded last year was called Amazing Grace, and it was an arts program for children of incarcerated adults. And it was a small program, not really benefiting a large number, but benefiting, I think, a very underserved number. So that was the kind of thing that we like to look for. We often have given to larger groups like Rise and Shine, which again benefits youth in the community. We have given to schools, libraries with science programs, Mass Audubon.
We did an outstanding grant last year for, it was through Mass Audubon Long Pasture and Matakees Middle School, and they were actually doing a head starting program of the spadefoot toad, which is an endangered species. So the students were getting to learn about the endangered species and foster its development and then release them back out into the vernal pools, which was really exciting to bring the science and bring different groups together that hadn't been able to work together before.
Oh, that's fantastic. So talk a little bit about this application process. You know, when I think of grants, I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so much writing. But if you're prepared to do this, it's all online?
It is all online. All the applications will be at the www.mass/culture.org, and you can go on there, and this goes for all local cultural councils. All the applications will be up there. And one of the unique availabilities of this is that you don't have to be a 501c3 nonprofit to apply for these grants, which with many foundations you do actually have to be. So we really like to fund local artists that are trying to make a living as a local artist, and they're not a nonprofit. You go onto that application site, and as long as you have your information together, substantiation in the form of agreements with whatever organizations you'll be working with, or a letter of understanding if you're going to be offering programming in a school, you can scan that information in and add it to the document, and then we just need a brief description of what you're planning to do and who it will be serving within the local community.
Right, and it's all fill in the blanks kind of thing. It's a
definitely.
fairly easy process to do, and you can save it if you're not
You can
finished
save it if you're not finished and come back to it at a later time.
Yeah, and the more extra information you can give, the more helpful it is. It's hard. Well, last year we had 45 applications, and it was quite a bit to weed through and to read and to make sure that you're not missing a really good program. So the clearer you are, the better, the more you kind of substantiate what you're doing, your budget, how you're using your money, those kind of things. But again, it's all just fill in the blanks on the application on the online.
Right, and I thought that was a great statement by you. It doesn't have to be a nonprofit. The ukulele kids come to mind because that's the woman who does that is an artist here on the Cape.
Exactly.
And she comes into an underserved school, gets the kids ukuleles, and they learn to play. And we heard them play.
They were outstanding and so
Fabulous.
passionate.
Yeah.
And this is an instrument they might not have had access to otherwise because it's not part of the public school curriculum.
Right. So when does this all end? Is there deadlines that people need to be aware of?
Yes, October 15th is the deadline for the online filing. And you can, of course, reach out to us at midcapecouncil2@gmail.com with any questions. We're happy to support anyone through the application process or answer questions if you really haven't flushed out the full program and you need some support. We're here to do that too, because we really want to see artists and individuals be successful in this process.
Right. So October 15th is the deadline, and then the Mid-Cape Cultural Council, what's the next timeline that people start to think about?
Really, it'll be the next grant cycle. We do the grant cycle once a year, so it's always an October 15th deadline. So that'll be when our next grant comes up. But we do have a project underway as well.
Yes,
that's going to be coming
and
up in the
we
spring.
review the grants. The council reviews the grants on our November meeting.
Okay. So they would know maybe by the end of the year, beginning of the year, if they had gotten a grant.
Yeah.
That's a great Christmas present.
It is a great Christmas present, yes. We have a self-imposed deadline of December 31st to notify, but we're usually completed before that and can get notice out before that.
Okay. And congratulations on your public art funding. You made your numbers and had the community kick in. So tell us briefly what your project is and how it benefits the town of Barnstable.
Well, this is the Discovery Walk, and it's down by the harbor, and we foolishly or hopefully think that eventually there will be other sculptures. So we have begun, we have 2 sculptures, we are seeking a third. The deadline for that is September 30th. There's a lot of information out there that it will connect to Main Street, and it's all interactive and fun so that you can sit on a rocking boat and or see birds fly. It's it's been a project, and it will continue, but we're really excited. It's going to be fun.
And one of the pieces we're quite excited about is we did receive an $11,000 matching grant from Mass Development
Yes.
for creative placemaking. So we had to go through a vetting process, and they found that this community was deserving of this project, and it was really going to improve the vitality of that area.
That's fantastic. And when you went in front of town council, you had an opening statement. Can you share that with us? Because I thought it was wonderful.
Well, I said I have to confess that I am a Wash Ashore New Yorker as of 4 years ago. And I was very involved in the arts there. But the delight here and the difference is that in New York, there is only one arts council, and it's in New York City. And it takes applications from all over the state, just in that one place. And when I came here and I discovered what a wonderful idea that these are local people on the council. They are taking grants from local organizations. They are working with the local town council, and it's all something that is very accessible and very friendly, instead of looking at a grant that is up on the Upper Peninsula or so far away that you don't even know what these people are talking about. So I'm glad to live here.
That's fantastic. So October 15th is the deadline for requests for proposals for granting for this year in the arts, the humanities, and the sciences, or blend all three.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
and look to serve the two communities. Anyone from the Cape can obviously submit an application, but primarily the towns of Barnstable and Yarmouth.
Correct.
Have I forgotten anything?
I don't think so.
I think
No.
you've been very thorough.
You know this process, yes.
I know the process a little bit,
Yeah.
having been a member of the Mid-Cape Cultural Center. Well, good luck in this
Thank
grant
you.
process. I know it's a lot of work, and it's a lot of really great people deserving it.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you so
Definitely.
much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
What is a floodplain, and is your property actually located on one? Do you really need flood insurance even if you don't live on the shore? Shannon Jarbrough, award-winning CRS and floodplain coordinator for Barnstable County's Cooperative Extension, joins us in studio to talk about reducing municipal flood risk and discounts on flood insurance. With me today, Shannon Jarbrough from the Barnstable County Extension. We're going to talk about community rating, insurance rating, and the floodplain. These are kind of complex, and a lot of people don't understand what this is. Shannon, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Paul.
So let's start with the first. Congratulations on the award last year. You got the James Lee Witt Local Award for Excellent in Floodplain Management.
Yes, thank you. Yes.
What is floodplain management?
That's a great question. So it's an emerging field. We have lots of flooding in all sorts of ways. Here on the Cape, we've got a lot of coastal flooding. Other parts of the country, they have a lot of riverine flooding. And then as we've started to see more of, there's a lot of rainfall flooding in areas that are far away from rivers or coasts. So floodplain management is figuring out how to manage that flooding. So things like building codes and zoning bylaws, conservation regulations, all these sorts of things are wrapped into floodplain management. So basically how we execute wise use of our floodplains, but also keep our communities safe and also have a reasonable balance with development.
It's interesting that this is a new thing. Flooding has always been a concern, especially on our coastlines here on the Cape. Why did this emerge within the last few years?
Well, so floodplain management itself has been around for decades, but it's starting to get more into communities, and we're starting to see it executed more fully.
Okay.
And the reason that is because we are starting to see more flooding. Okay. We have sea level rise, we are starting to see more intense rainfall events, so we've got more rain coming at one time. We're starting to see a lot more flooding, and so there's a higher demand for floodplain management. There's also the National Flood Insurance Program, which affects folks because if they have a federally backed mortgage in a floodplain, they are required to carry flood insurance. Okay. And the cost of flood insurance can be quite high, and it's been going up in the last several years. And here on the Cape, we had both those increases in flood insurance rates and change in our flood maps, and that happened pretty much all at once. So more people were put into the floodplain, suddenly had to have flood insurance when they didn't expect to before. Now they do, and their costs are going up. So here on the Cape, that specifically triggered a need for my position and for more complete floodplain management.
Right. And let's just make sure that people understand, because I didn't understand this, is that the state is only wind, it's not flood.
Right, correct, yes. So flood insurance is its own separate thing. It's not included in homeowners insurance. It's not part of the state fair plan. It is its own separate entity. So if you want flood insurance coverage, you have to purchase it separately. Unless USAA is the only company that I've found so far that does include flood. Every other company, you have to purchase it separately. So that's a really important piece, that if you want flood coverage, that you have to purchase a separate policy.
And let's talk about management. What are you doing, putting up dams?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what we try to do is avoid hard structures as much as we can, seawalls, things like that, because those have adverse impacts on the natural environment and on coastal processes. Seawalls can damage beaches, and of course we don't want that. We want to keep our beaches as healthy as possible here on the Cape. So what it is building codes is a big piece of it. So it's whenever we have a new structure or a structure that's been significantly improved, that they have to come into compliance with certain floodplain building regulations. So it's basically building higher off the ground, and it's making room for the floodwaters to come in under the structure. It's allowing the water to come in, which is kind of counterintuitive. You wouldn't think you want to invite the water in, but that's the best way to keep the foundation of the structure safe, and it's not going to have the pressure from the water on the outside if the water can flow through it. So it's allowing that water to come in. It's keeping all living space and utilities up above the expected levels of flooding, keeping everything as safe as possible above those expected flood levels.
Okay, so is this new development, right? Or maybe things that had been damaged and now have to be rebuilt?
So it's any new development, anything that has been substantially damaged, which is defined as 50% or more of the market value, and then anything that is being substantially improved, which again is 50% or more of the market value. So anytime someone puts a lot of renovations into their home, then that may be 50% or more. So the building departments are all going to be keeping track of how much money is going into a structure if it's in the floodplain, so that they know if it needs to be brought into compliance. So it may need to be retroactively elevated, but any new development, it'll be right off the bat in the first place. It'll be elevated.
So this is something like what I had seen maybe perhaps in New Jersey after Sandy, is a lot of those new homes that went in after being damaged, and obviously they couldn't live in them, they had to be destroyed, is they're on stilts.
Yes. Yep. So stilts is one way to do it. Stilts have to be used for the highest risk flood zone where we expect to see a lot of wave action. Waves on top of flooding is a huge risk. Those waves can be really powerful and cause a lot of damage. So in what's called the velocity zone, which is right along the coast, houses do have to be up on stilts if they're new, substantially improved, or substantially damaged. Otherwise, the next zone back, where there's lower risk of wave action, they just need to have flood vents. They can still have a solid foundation, but they need to have flood vents, which basically look like an air vent that you see in a foundation, but they're lower. They have to be within a foot of the ground, and they have a special mechanism that when water hits them, they float open. So, critters can't get in, trash can't get in. It's only water that can get in, and then that lets the water flow in through the crawl space and then safely exit eventually with a sump pump.
That's really interesting. So when we talk about floodplain, I would normally think that maybe, Route 6A down in the Sandy Neck into Barnstable area. But because of the rain events that we're having, our floodplains can be around our streams and our rivers and our ponds and lakes too?
Absolutely, yes, absolutely, yes. So there are coastal floodplains, but there are also a significant number of floodplains around streams, ponds, and lakes. And then what we're also starting to see is non-mapped floodplains. So with those rain events, we're seeing rain pool in places that are not mapped floodplains. So at the county, we're trying to track that and get a handle on where those areas are, because it's not mapped anywhere.
Right. And what do homeowners do in that situation? Can they call you to see if they're in one of those plains?
We can try,
Okay.
but I can look at the mapping that I've done, but it's only over the last couple of years, so it's not a full data set. But what they can do if they're concerned, if they've seen some water moving toward their house in those heavy rain events, if they've had flooding from those heavy rain events, we can talk about flood insurance. They can also talk to their insurance agent. They would get most likely flood insurance through the National Flood Insurance Program, but that goes through private insurance companies. So they can talk to their insurance agent about that. And if they're outside of a mapped floodplain, then their costs are going to be really low. So it's certainly something to consider talking to an insurance agent about, or I'm happy to talk to them as well.
Okay. So we kind of like segued into this. This is the community rating piece of this, and that's really fascinating to me. Tell us what that is.
So the community rating system is a part of the National Flood Insurance Program, and it provides discounts on flood insurance for residents and businesses in participating communities. So we have 9 communities that are participating in the CRS right now on the Cape, and we're working to get more in. We have anywhere from a 5 to 15% discount. Orleans has a 15% discount, and Sandwich just got in with a 15% discount. So anyone that has a flood insurance policy from the National Flood Insurance Program, which again is most of them, they will see that right on their bill. It'll say either CRS or Community Rating System discount, and they will see exactly how many dollars they are saving on their flood insurance program from that. And what the town does is take actions that help reduce the risk of flooding and improve community safety. So things like making sure those building codes from the state are enforced, having maybe stronger zoning bylaws, maybe limiting where development can be, limiting if it's in a really hazardous area. Preserving open space is the biggest thing that a town can do, or an entity outside of the town. As long as it's preserved in the floodplain, we get a lot of points for that. Public outreach is another big thing. Mosquito control helps us get credit because they clear all of the ditches, so they help remove any debris that could cause backup and flooding. The Cape and Islands Association of Realtors helps us get credit because the MLS listing here on the Cape and on the islands has a specific line about whether or not flood insurance is going to be required. So that helps us get credit too. It's about public outreach and doing what we can to improve the safety of our community.
Okay, so this rating really literally is due to the work of each individual town.
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So at the county level, we do as much as we can for them, and so that's what's unique about my position here on Cape Cod. There's no other position like this in the country. So I help the towns manage the community rating system on a regional basis. So I do a lot of the work for them as much as I can, but then there are a lot of things that the towns do on their own. So individually, their zoning bylaws, conservation bylaws, their open space preservation, the outreach that they choose to do, that's all their decision and within the town itself.
Okay, and how do residents kind of advocate for that for the towns that aren't participating yet?
They can call their selectmen is a great way to start, and they can ask why. There might be a reason why. Most of the towns are working toward it, and it's just a matter of resources, but we will get there. The selectmen is a great place to start.
Fantastic. And you mentioned just before when you came in, you have this very long title, but you're
Yes.
also with the Woods Hole Sea Group.
Correct. Yes. So Woods Hole Sea Grant is part of Sea Grant is a national entity. It's part of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. There are Sea Grant programs in every coastal state, and there are different components of it. There's research, there's outreach, and there's extension. So I'm part of the extension program for Woods Hole Sea Grant, and we take science from the universities and help translate that to the end users. And we do a lot of coastal policy and public outreach.
That's
as
really
well.
cool.
It is. It's very neat.
Is there anything else that you want our residents here in Barnstable to know about floodplains or how they best can protect themselves and their property?
Yes. So for one thing, Barnstable is working toward joining the community rating system. So once we accomplish that, residents will see a discount. Okay. Everyone should take a look at their insurance policies and see if they have flood coverage. They should consider if they want flood coverage. If they're in a floodplain, I highly recommend it. If they want to know if they're in a floodplain, they're welcome to call me and we can figure that out. Okay. But anywhere I'd recommend flood insurance because especially with these rain events, you just never know when you might get flooding. But they can also call and ask what kind of coverage that might provide. From the National Flood Insurance Program, basement coverage is very limited. So if you're just looking for basement coverage, then we can talk about maybe you'd want to go with a private policy instead of a National Flood Insurance Program policy. So those are things that I'm happy to talk to them about. But it's important to check your policy and make sure you understand what you're covered for.
Right. Excellent. This was fantastic, Shannon.
Great.
Thank
Thanks
you.
a lot, Paula.
Here's a look at the community calendar. Are you watching kids scroll through life with their rapid-fire thumbs and 6-second attention span? Physician and filmmaker Delaney Rustin saw that with her own kids and learned that the average kid spends 6.5 hours a day looking at screens. She wondered about the impact of all this time and about the friction occurring in homes and schools around negotiating screen time. Friction she knew all too well. The Cape Cod Cooperative Extension, Barnstable Recreation, and Barnstable Youth Commission will co-host a free screening of Screenagers on Thursday, October 18th at 7 p.m. at the Barnstable High School Performing Arts Center. Here's a look at this week's schedule for boards, commissions, and committees. Comments, suggestions, accolades? Connect with us on Facebook and Instagram, email us, or send us an old-fashioned note by carrier pigeon. Channel 18 works for you. I'm Paula Hersey, and thank you for watching Barnstable Today.